Welcome back! The goal of this second video is to look at the first two steps in the program evaluation framework, engaging stakeholders and describing the program. In the last video, you had a glimpse of the program evaluation framework. In this video, we're going to dig deeper into the first two steps, engaging stakeholders and describing the program. Just as you wouldn't take a trip without knowing where you're going, you wouldn't conduct an evaluation without having a plan. Your evaluation plan is your roadmap. Ideally, you should develop an evaluation plan before your program starts, using a process that involves all relevant program stakeholders. When designing a program, it's easy to only focus on the immediate decisions to implement the program and make it operational. But evaluating a program can be challenging and impossible if you don't plan for evaluation during program development. This plan will drive decisions on what data will be needed and how to collect them. Engaging stakeholders in program and evaluation planning has many benefits, but first you need to decide who should be involved and how they can be engaged. In general, stakeholders include people who will use the evaluation results, support or maintain the program, or who are affected by the program activities or evaluation results. Look at the table displayed on your screen and think about who your program stakeholders might be. By involving stakeholders, you create buy-in and help avoid pitfalls that may not be apparent to yourself and other program staff. When stakeholders buy in, they can help move a program forward and eliminate barriers to change. Stakeholders can help inform the process, understand the information gathered, and assist the program with necessary changes. By including stakeholders in your evaluation, you ensure transparency and foster relationships and collaboration. In addition, you include diverse perspectives, expertise, and influence. After engaging stakeholders to participate in your planning and evaluation efforts, the next step is to describe your program. A program description clarifies the program's purpose, activities, and outcomes. Most descriptions include a statement of the problem and why it's important. Inputs are program resources, program activities or outputs, program outcomes, assumptions, and external factors. The program description includes a narrative description to help ensure a full and complete understanding of the program. Generally, a logic model is also used to visually present the main elements of the program. Many people compare a logic model to a roadmap in that it helps you to describe where your program's going and how to get there. Logic models provide a systematic and visual way to present and share your understanding of the relationships among the resources you have to operate your program, the activities you plan, and the changes or results you hope to achieve. Logic models present a series of if-then relationships that, if implemented as intended, lead to the desired outcomes. Most importantly, from an evaluation perspective, a logic model will help you identify if you achieved your desired outcomes. Said best by Yogi Berra, if you don't know where you're going, how are you going to know when you get there? As I mentioned before, the best time to plan your program evaluation, including developing your logic model, is while you're developing your program.
In this video, we will talk about an easy way to tell the difference between an input, activity, output, outcome, and impact. A fun way to visualize these concepts is to imagine someone walking on a beach. He sees a bed of rocks and thinks it would be a good idea to throw rocks in the water. The rocks represent the financial, human, physical, and material resources that are available to the organization. These are the inputs that would be fed into a given program or project. He makes the decision to throw a rock in the sea. The act of throwing the rock represents the activities of a program. Once the rock hits the water, they make splashes. The splash is the immediate effect of the activity of throwing the rock. In other words, the splash represents the outputs and is the immediate result of the completion of program activities. Outputs are the products and/or services which results from the completion of activities. The initial splashes, which are the outputs, create a ripple effect on the water. The ripples represent outcomes. Outcomes are the short-term and medium-term effects of the outputs. In other words, what changes occur due to the output. Lastly, the horizon represents the long-term goals, impact, objective, or the lasting changes that we hope to achieve by the program's intervention. It is the result of all the activities, outputs, and outcomes that achieves the goal. So, to summarize, inputs are the financial, human, technical, community, and local resources. Activities are what is done with the inputs, that is, the actions, processes, events, tools, meetings, and trainings. Outputs are the tangible products of the program activities. They are the deliverables, such as policy papers drafted and schools built. Outcomes are what the project expects to accomplish at the beneficiary level. It is the intended or achieved short-term and medium-term effects of an intervention's outputs. Goal or impact is the highest end result. This is the change expected over the long term. In the logical framework, the different steps are ordered sequentially. Activities feed into outputs, which lead to outcomes, which achieve the overall goals.
In its simplest form, a logic model is a graphic representation that shows the logical relationships between the resources that go into the program, referred to as inputs, the activities the program undertakes, referred to as outputs, and the changes or benefits that result, referred to as outcomes. So let's look at an everyday situation that most of us can relate to. It's a little afternoon, and we start to feel hungry. What's involved to satisfy that hunger? Probably what you want is food. So first you need to find some food. Then you need to eat the food. Then you'll be satisfied and feel better. The important thing is to feel better, the desired end result, the outcome, what we're working toward. And the simplest form of the logic model is inputs, outputs, outcome. In this next example, it's summertime, and we want to take a family vacation. From past experience, we know that camping is something we all enjoy doing together. So in order to take a camping trip, we need resources, including mom, dad, my sister, brother, plus our vacation budget, our car, and camping equipment. These resources make it possible for us to drive to a state park, set up camp, and engage in a variety of camping activities. As a result of camping together, we benefit in a number of ways. We will learn more about each other, we increase our bond as a family unit, and we'll have fun. Logic models involve a mental process. A logic model shows the series of connections and logical linkages that's expected to result in the achievement of our goal. Now that we've looked at logic models in their most basic form, and we've applied the basic form to everyday situations, let's now look at a template for a full logic model. You might be thinking to yourself, I thought a logic model was supposed to make describing the program easier. It looks pretty complex. It's actually simpler than it looks. Let's take a look at the logic model in its separate pieces. Let's break it down a little bit. First, you look at the situation statement. In this first step of the logic model development, you consider what is the problem or condition that requires a programmatic response. For example, there might be a change in waste management certification requirements, or there's a high rate of child obesity in the county. The next component of the logic model is inputs, or sometimes called resources. This is what you invest in the program, including human capital resources, such as staff, participants, volunteers, or any other organizations that are involved. Your financial resources, time, facilities, land, materials and supplies, vehicles or other forms of transportation, computers, and so forth. Think of the resources necessary for your programs. They might include federal, state, or local resources, other extension professionals, research facilities, equipment, supplies, training materials, farm equipment, cooking equipment, just to name a few. The next part of the logic model includes outputs, which is divided into two parts: activities, which you can think of as what we do, and participation, or who we reach. When you identify your activities, consider the amount of product or services the program will deliver if you complete your planned activities. For example, in the Healthy Foods training, 25 participants were given a brochure. Other examples might be the number of workshops conducted, the number of demonstrations, the number of people attending a meeting, number of certifications, number of youth attending 4-H camps, number of press releases, and so forth. When identifying program reach, consider who is supposed to participate, whether it be individuals, families, groups, businesses, organizations, or communities. Be as specific as possible identifying who is targeted. Although you might think satisfaction is a result or an outcome of your program, it's actually an output, because being satisfied doesn't mean someone has changed or improved. Participants might be satisfied with the program, or like you as a person, or want to come again, but such reactions do not indicate they've changed or benefited in any way. If you are measuring satisfaction, you need to include this as an output. Outcomes identify the changes in knowledge, behavior, or condition that result from the program. In other words, how your targeted audience benefits from the activities. Outcomes are often divided into short, medium, and long term. Short-term outcomes are learning-based and often focus on attitudes, knowledge, awareness, and skill development. For example, the number of producers who gain knowledge to increase production for local markets, the number of youth increasing knowledge regarding leadership, or the number of participants increasing skills related to weed management. Medium-term outcomes involve action and early-stage behavior change in practice, decision-making, or policies. For example, the number of producers reporting reduction in fertilizer use per acre, the number of participants that have adopted farm safety practices, and the number of participants growing food for home consumption. Long-term outcomes involve changes in social, economic, civil, and environmental conditions. For example, the cost savings from implementing extension recommended practices to conserve water use and protect water quality, the value of reduced risk of farm and food hazards, and net income gain by using livestock organic byproducts instead of synthetic fertilizers. Let's look back to the full logic model. Hopefully now it's not so overwhelming. I want to spend a few more minutes on the differences between outputs and outcomes. This is an area that tends to get people a little confused. Outputs are the direct and measurable products of a program's activities and services. They are often expressed in terms of volume or units delivered. If you look on the flowchart above, outputs include the number of workshops held, the satisfaction with the workshops, and the numbers of farmers attending. Outcomes are the results or impact of the activities and services. You might measure the amount of knowledge gained, the number of farmers who adopted the new practice, and the increased profits resulting from the adopted practice. Let's test your logic model IQ and see if you can identify inputs, outputs, and outcomes. Participants serve more than one kind of vegetable to their families every day after participating. Is this an input, an output, or an outcome? This is an outcome, specifically a behavior change. As a result of attending the program, the participants have taken action, changed their behavior, and are serving more than one kind of vegetable to their families. Let's try another. 5 adults have consistently attended all the nutrition workshops. This is an output. In this case, you're describing your participation. Let's see how you do on this one. The Safe Serve education program is working with 80% of all food service managers in the state. You have another output. You're describing your participation. 80% of food service managers in the state. A local industry contributed $1,500 to the 4-H Community Service Project. This one is an input. The $1,500 is a resource used for your program. Okay, what do you think of this one? Overall herd health increased, reducing production costs. The increase in herd health, which reduced production costs, is an outcome. In this case, it's a change in economic condition. Veterinarians co-taught the sessions. Here you have an input. The veterinarians are human capital, like staff and volunteers. Teens reported increased ability to identify and help solve a community need. This is an outcome. Teens have an increase in knowledge and ability following the program participation. Let's do a couple more. Volunteers provided over 300 hours of support to the project. This is an input. Volunteers provide time and service to support your program. Producers decreased their use of medications and made biosecurity improvements to prevent health problems. This represents a long-term outcome because of the prevention of future health problems. All right, this is the last one. Let's see how you do. Newsletters are distributed in 3 languages. Distribution of newsletters is an activity that is part of your program, so it's considered an output. Now that we've talked about the fundamental elements of a logic model, let's finish up talking about describing the program by looking at a couple of logic models. The first one is a program to improve water quality. There are a couple of assumptions built into the model, which are listed at the bottom. First, that reducing phosphorus saves time and money, and that low phosphorus feed is readily available. These seem like reasonable assumptions. Do you agree? The model only works based on the fact that these assumptions hold true. Also, the model considers one external factor, that government programs regulate and offer incentives. Reading the logic model from left to right, you see the program requires staff, money, materials, partners, and resources to operate. These are the inputs. Now, looking at the outputs, the staff will use its resources listed in the inputs section to hold educational workshops for farmers at risk of overfeeding phosphorus. They will also set up record-keeping systems to track phosphorus levels and make on-farm visits for farmers at risk of overfeeding phosphorus. By completing those outputs, the outcomes will result. So looking at the outcomes section, in the short term, there will be an increase in knowledge of the link between cattle diet and water quality, increased understanding of the recommended phosphorus levels, and increased knowledge of the tracking phosphorus levels. Intermediate outcomes include changes in behavior. In this situation, the farms would monitor their phosphorus levels in feed, manure, and soil, and make appropriate adjustments to cattle feed. Finally, the long-term outcomes would be changes to condition, including reductions in phosphorus use, feed cost savings, and long-term environmental impact of improved water quality. Now let's look at a community nutrition education logic model example. Notice this model, although the same general format, looks a little different. The goal of this program is to provide educational programs to increase the likelihood of people making healthy food choices. This model doesn't list any assumptions or external factors, so let's move on to the meat of the model. Reading the logic model from left to right, you see the program requires financial resources, planning processes, materials, and people as inputs. Now, looking at the outputs, the program has three components: educational programs for food stamp individuals, community partnerships with agency partners, and social system and policy changes with policymakers. Moving on to outcomes, individuals gain awareness, knowledge, and skills by planning menus and using the pyramid, identifying emergency food sources, practicing personal hygiene, and listing available resources. Individuals change behavior by improving food intake, enrolling in non-emergency food programs, increasing practice of personal hygiene, and using 3 careful shopping practices. Long-term outcomes that decrease risk factors include decreasing chronic disease risk factors, reducing anxiety related to food security, decreasing illness due to food contamination, and reducing reliance on others for food. Agency partners are also impacted by gaining awareness, developing plans, and solving community problems. And policymakers are impacted by identifying and defining issues, working toward needed changes, and revising laws, policies, and practices. Here's another more creative example of a logic model. All logic models don't have to be necessarily in the exact same format. In this logic model, they use different colored lines to show the different links between the outputs and outcomes. And here's one more example. Your logic model can be as simple or as complex as you need it to be, but remember, the purpose of a logic model is to provide a snapshot of your program and to clarify and graphically display what your project intends to do. If it's too complex and contains too much information, it won't be a useful tool to serve that purpose. To successfully evaluate your efforts, you'll need to collect data on your outputs and outcomes. Planning for your evaluation is important, so you're sure you have the information you'll need. Once you've engaged your stakeholders and described your program by developing a logic model, you're ready to move on to the next step in the evaluation process.